They tell me that I'm late again. And they tell me that I have to stand up here, which feels really odd. I'd rather walk up and down the aisles, but I don't want to mess up the mic, and I don't want to have any ringing in your ears. Anyway, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it. I know it's a really busy time of the year. Everybody that I've talked to said, like, this is the worst timing possible, so leave it to us to figure that out. When's the worst time? Let's do something then. But we've had a couple meetings. We had the legislative budget hearing down in Little Rock, and then I just had a meeting with Arkansas Department of Higher Education. And we really felt like we need to start some conversations. So today is really just the first of what I hope will be a lot of different conversations with this group and with the whole campus. One of the first things that I've seen is that I want to do a better job of communicating what we're thinking in Central and what we're thinking in the colleges to all of the faculty. And so I've already visited with 3 or 4 different departments, and Julie is trying to schedule times for me to meet with any department or any unit would like me to come and talk to them, because I often feel like the one-on-one's easier than this, although this is the best way to get as many people as possible at one time. And I don't know that we have enough time for question and answers today. I hope we do, but I don't know if we do. If we don't, we're going to make the recording available to people in the PowerPoint. So if you do have something, you want to wait till the next conversation to bring that question, or if you even want to just email us, we'll answer it. We'll probably bring it to the next conversation, because if 2 people have the same question, there's probably 6 or 7 people that do, right? So really what I want to do is we're going to talk financials, but maybe in a little bit of a different way than usual. I want to start with like a real big view of kind of the context of where we are, not just in Arkansas, not just at Arkansas State, but where we are in the United States, and then get down to here where we are. Because the issues and the challenges we face are things that are macro level in many ways, okay? So am I switching slides, or we're not? You are switching slides. Thank you very much. So in the 1980s and early 90s, when I went to grad school, and where a lot of you faculty went to grad school, higher education was considered a public good, right? It was something that, it's like K through 12 today. It's something that the state needs. So most institutions of higher education were funded at 80% by federal or state dollars. Tuition was very, very low. It remained low through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. It started really going up high in the late 90s, and then really getting high in the 2000s. And that's largely because the country decided higher education wasn't a public good, it was a private good. Now that has a lot of ramifications for even just what we do, because when we're publicly funded, we can do some things that as a privately funded, almost like a business, and I hate to use that word because the academic in me cringes, but when we're funded as a business, we have a customer who's buying something, there's a very different interaction that we have, right? So this chart here, it's a little tough for me to see back there, so if you can see, we're down here at this year, 40% of our budget comes from the state. That's really high. Among the SECs and among most schools in the South, some of them are below 20. Some of them consider themselves state schools that don't get any state funding. I know several land grant institutions that are saying if we could get one big donor, we could be private. And they'd like to do that just to separate themselves from the state. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I know that they're thinking about it, right? That 40% that we face right there, it's not going to go higher. It's not going to go higher in the immediate future. In fact, there's a possibility it could go lower. I talk to legislators, I talk to gubernatorial candidates that talk about how that 40% is too high. And I'm going, well, where are we transferring all the costs? We're transferring all the costs to students and their families who are taking loans, right? And we've heard more and more pushback about higher education. Is it worth it? Do I want to do it? That kind of thing. Why? It's not necessarily because our costs have gone up, although they have, because just inflation would make them go up a lot, right? We're all paying a lot more for gasoline and groceries right now. Computers cost a lot more. IT fixes cost a lot more. Costs are going to continue to rise, but it's going to be borne by parents and kids. That's particularly tough for a regional institution like us and other regional institutions because our base of students aren't necessarily really wealthy kids from North Dallas or, Palo Alto, California, or Malibu, right? So I want you to understand this 40% is really good. It's great. But we're planning and we're thinking that could go down. A win is if we keep that at 40%, okay? All right, go ahead, next slide. So the next problem we face is not necessarily the declining funding that we're getting from the state, but the population in the United States is changing. We have fewer and fewer 18-year-olds that could go to school, and we have fewer of the 18-year-olds choosing to go to school. So it's kind of like a double hit. There are fewer of them for us to say, hey, come to Arkansas State. Fewer of them, if this was the pool of people that could go to college, that's shrinking. And then the number of them that decide they want to go to college is shrinking. So the competition for the few students that are there is really, really low. I'm going to come back to a few of the other changes that are happening within that group of students, but I want you to know this is kind of what we call the cliff, or what the demographic. If anybody in here read the Chronicle of Higher Education? I mean, I've stopped reading it because it just depresses me. But like they keep warning about the cliff is coming, the cliff. And I think many of you heard me say that, yes, the cliff is coming. The cliff is coming. The question is it going to hit us as hard as it hits other places? Is it going to hit us as hard as it's going to hit other states? We're predicted to do a little bit better than other states who are predicting, hey, 20% loss. Now, I will say this, it's a shorter time frame. The cliff is more like a valley. I like that kind of analogy a little bit better. It's a valley. We got to get through the valley. Now, I think that there will be a lot of institutions that may not make it through the valley. If we make it through the valley, it'll be about the decisions we make right now, right? I worry that if we wait 2 years to make decisions, then we're going to be in the valley whether we want to be or not. It'll be too late. Because everybody else is making decisions right now too. And we're all competing for the same group of people. All right, go ahead, next slide. Okay, so this one, this is just, this is public, this is all universities. It's not just Arkansas State, but this is Arkansas. So you can see over the last 4 years, 3.5% fewer students in Arkansas are even going to college. And we've got greater competition for those students than ever. So we want them to come here, but so does everybody else. Okay, go ahead, next slide. So this one was presented at the Department of Higher Education, and I was like glad we were up at the top there, but at the same time it's a little frightening. If you look at it, we're up, and I'll come back to why we're up a little bit later, but if you look at all the people down here that are down, and I'm going to have a slide here in a little bit that I'm going to preview right now, but these people that are below us, look at the number of people that were above 11,000. UCA, ATU, UALR, they're at 8,000 or lower. And they're in dire straits. They're examples of places that I feel like waited way too long to decide what are we going to do. So in many respects, the cliff is here, although let's start saying the valley, because the cliff isn't permanent. We're going to have an upswing of 18-year-olds. Unfortunately, it's not going to be for another like 5 or 6 years. So we've got to get through this time period right here. And we're going to be changing because the type of student we teach is so different than the type of student that I taught all through the 90s and early 2000s. They're just fundamentally different. Whether you want to admit it or not, they're different, right? Okay, go ahead. So at the Arkansas Higher Education meeting, Shane Broadway leaned over and said, Maybe they'll give you a pass because you're new. And I was like, please God, let them give me a pass because I'm new. But they went through all the programs that everybody was cutting in order to like say, hey, we're moving resources from this area to this growth area. Or somebody retired and we're not going to replace that line. There wasn't anybody up here except for UALR, well, I take that back, UALR and Fort Smith, who fired anybody, who let people go. But if you look at UALR, they cut 21 programs, and I believe it's now 6 departments that they have rescinded, and that's a academic word for I don't care if you have tenure, bye. Financial reasons, they can just say there's no more need for you, bye. So I'm not saying that's happening here, it's not. But I am saying that like even UA Fayetteville is up here cutting 4 programs, and we're not up there thinking about, okay, this is what we're doing for cost savings, this is how we're reallocating lines, or this is what we're doing. And fortunately, they didn't call on me, so I didn't have to answer that at all. If I was ready, I was ready to plead I've been here for 9 weeks, I don't really know, let me get back with you, right? This was kind of shocking to me to see the number of programs that people are going. And that's just this year. So we're going to have to be thinking about this as we go on. I know we're going to keep getting questions about it. We're probably going to get questions about it from the Higher Learning Commission because all these system presidents are talking to the Higher Learning Commission too. Okay, go ahead, next slide. So not only do we have this cliff, but we have a very different type of student. We have students now who are getting bonus offers right out of high school. Come work for fill in the blank company. We'll give you a signing bonus. We'll start you at X thousand dollars a year, and then we'll help you go to college if you want to. Unfortunately, a lot of those students say this immediate gratification is great. I'm going to take it. They're able to buy a car, get an apartment, feeling like they're out of their home, making progress. It's not until later in their career that they realize, I've hit a wall. I don't like this career. I want to change, and I can't. We're having more and more people that are saying, I don't need a 4-year degree, but I need training in this. Now, I'll use my son as an example. His company, they've been using Excel and Access and a program called R for you statisticians out there. I know that Finn is nodding her head right now, knowing what I'm talking about. But they just moved to a system called Palantir. It's brand new. I don't know anything about it at all. He asked me if I could help him with it, and I'm like, I don't know anything about Palantir at all. I don't know if you've all heard about it, but they've company-wide bought it, and there's really no training on it. What they're looking for is a 6 or 7 week program to give somebody a certificate that says you've got a gold standard in this and you know how to run it. He's not in any position to come back to college, but that's something he'd pay for. That's something that the company would pay for. That's not something that in the past we have ever provided, right? I'll give you another example. Companies are now saying, and we're seeing this, I'm looking at Martha right now, we're seeing this with students who live on their phone. They might go out to dinner together and they're sitting around a table and they're all going like this and they're texting each other. And I'm like, you're not talking to each other? No, they're comfortable here. They're not comfortable talking to each other. So then when they go and they join a team at a company, they really don't know how to interact with that team. They really don't know how to forget project management or even confronting somebody and saying, hey, you're doing this really well, but this really needs to change. You need to double down on this or prove this. They just can't do it. So companies are actually, I don't know, in the last 10 days, I think 10 companies have asked us to put together, could you put something together on conflict resolution? Could you put something together for project management? Could you put something together just how to meet people so they put their phone away? We have never had that type of thing happen before, particularly at we're not Votech, but that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about really helping our students who have a 4-point in the honors program do really well on their interview. And they're fantastically qualified, but they're so alone and isolated and not trained in some of the things that we were, right? So different types of students are really changing things. increasingly, if we're not going to do it, businesses are saying we're going to do it. Walmart is an example. Walmart is now telling high school students, come to Walmart U. We're going to train you in the software we use. We're going to train you in our system. We're going to put you on a career track right out of high school. In fact, we'll give you an internship your senior year that will pay you. We'll try to get you credit in high school, concurrent credit in high school, and then you can just run that through. Now, the problem is, of course, as soon as they turn 28, 29, they realize they can't go any higher. They need a management degree, or they need a finance degree, or they need strategic communication, or they need some type of degree. Unfortunately, they're old enough now that they've got a family, they've got a wife or a husband or a loved one, they've got kids, they're taking care of an elderly parent, or something's happening that they can't really come back to campus, right? And that's going to happen. Now, one of the things that I really would like to, I heard this a lot in my first month here, that the Arkansas online programs was really stealing from the face-to-face on-campus students. That was not my experience in the past, but that didn't mean it wasn't true here. So, I don't know where Tilla is, but I beat Tilla up for a while. He's in the back, he stays as far away from me as he can. But I did beat him up for a while because I was going, you're stealing on-campus students. I'm hearing it everywhere. So we did a really deep dive on this, and honestly, I don't believe that. I believe it's a myth. I don't know how that myth happened. I'm going to come back to some enrollment figures here in a second. But this is a different population of students that are online. These are, let's say, and this is graduate students and undergraduate students up there. But if we combine them, let's say that the average age is 33, 34 years old. They've got 2 kids. They've got a 50-hour-a-week job. They're barely making ends meet. They've hit the glass ceiling wherever they are. They need some type of training, and there's no way they're coming back and joining a fraternity. There's no way they're coming back and taking 15 hours. There's no way they're coming back and living in a residence hall. That's not possible for them, right? So what we're providing with Arkansas State Online is a very different population than the students we have face-to-face. Now, do we need one or the other? No, we need both. And I'll come back to why we need both in just a second, okay? But I just wanted to make sure that we are clear that I just don't believe, if somebody has arguments to the contrary, I'm open to that, but after looking at these students, I just don't believe they're the same crew. I mean, we're looking at people who are in their 30s and they have careers, and they don't want a 4-year degree. Okay, go ahead. So forget the red line at the top right now. This bottom, I guess it's a blue line. I'm kind of colorblind. Is it blue line? Gray, darkish line. Right around 2000, at 2011. So Arkansas Online is really flat for about 4 years till 2014. And it takes a jump in 2015, and then it kind of goes up to where we are right now. But if you compare that to where we were on campus, back in 2011, we were at 11,808. So, I mean, really, in many ways, we're staffed for over 10,000 students on campus. Unfortunately, we have 8,000 students on campus. And when I hear people ask me, what's the right mix? And I honestly thought that I understood what people were saying then. I understand what they're asking about now much more than I did before. The students that are on campus are spending a lot more money here than just tuition and fees. The students that are spending here are paying dorm fees. They're paying lunch, cafeteria fees. They're going to sporting events. They're doing things that cost money. They're spending other money here, and they're spending other money in town. The students that are online are definitely giving us money we wouldn't have otherwise. I mean, if we didn't have the online, look where we'd be. I mean, in many respects, if we didn't have the online, we'd be right there with UCA, right there with Tech, right there with everybody else that used to be over 10,000 that aren't anymore, right? So in many ways, you all were very innovative before everybody else was. And that really helped you. Because honestly, what was supposed to be this standalone, pay-for-yourself online program Seriously, and I've got the budget people here to tell me I'm wrong, but it's the online money that's paid for the raises. It's paid for the adjustments. It's paid for different positions in your units. In many ways, the online is subsidizing what is happening on campus. Does that make sense? Is that a good thing? Not a good thing. I would like to see we got to grow on campus and we've got to grow online. I want to see them. It's not an either or, it's yes, both. Because it's 18-year-olds and it's 30-year-olds. And then pretty soon, I think it's going to be 50-year-olds. And they're going to want something completely different. And things are changing already. I mean, I saw a presentation just the other day where virtual learning is already here. You know those Oculus Rifts that people put on? So my field's American National Government and Statistics, but the American National Government, when you put this Oculus Rift on and you walked up to Benjamin Franklin, then you walked up to James Madison, and then you talked to them about the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. And they told you what they didn't like and what they didn't like. They got into an argument, and it was weird being in the room, but that was how I was learning it. And then I had this avatar of a teacher who was pausing it and saying, did you catch what James Madison just said? Did you catch what Jefferson just said? And it was just bizarre. That's coming next, right? In fact, it's already here. It's going to keep on changing like this, and we're going to have to keep changing like this. You know, unfortunately, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, we didn't have to really change. We did what we always did, and students came. And higher education value was always there. The higher education value is actually greater now than it's ever been before, but the public doesn't realize that. The public thinks that the higher education value is less, right? But if you look at over time what you make, your quality of life and that kind of thing is greater if you go to college. I have a theory, this is just Todd's theory, but I believe that with artificial intelligence and with robots doing dental work, robots driving trucks, robots cleaning trash, robots doing everything, we're going to all change again because we're all going to be fixing robots, right? That's what we're all going to be doing next. Now, we don't have degree programs for that, but we're going to be developing in them, I'm pretty sure, right? Okay, any questions about this? Okay, let's go to the next one. So right now, what I'd like to say is we're managing these finances. We're doing okay. I mean, I'm not going, all right, we're going to have identify 20% cuts, or I'm not going to say we're going to have to find 15 people to fire. We're not saying that at all. What I am saying, though, is that we're in a very fortunate place that some of the innovations you did way before me, you all did it, were brilliant. So glad you did it, because we're at a place where we can make a decision now, how do we survive the valley, right? How do we survive this dip? What are we going to do that, right? And so we are going to have to make some tough decisions, but I want to do that with this discussion with you. I don't want to do it from you just get an email or you read about it in the paper. I've lived that life and I hate it. I know you would hate that too. We're going to have discussions and talks about what we're doing, but we will be able to make it. I'm convinced Arkansas State's going to go through this valley, and I'm convinced we're going to be stronger. But it won't always be easy going through it. So I'm just trying to be as honest as I can with you about this right now. All right, we're going to go down deeper into, I think the next slide, we're going deeper into the budgets, and they were worried that I'd say something wrong. So we're going to ask Russ to come up here so I get out of his way. Then I'll come back. And for some reason, I need 4 chairs up here.
The other thing I would say is I was visiting with some of the deans before we got started, asking them how they were doing, and they said, well, it depends on what you're going to talk about today. And I said, well, if you leave the meeting and you're not concerned, then we've not done a good job of conveying our message. Depressed may be too strong a word, but concerned, I think, is certainly appropriate. So this chart that we have up here now,
Russ,
you're an individual or a family or a university, that's not sustainable. We all know that. We can't live beyond our means indefinitely. And so that chart, for those of us in the finance office, has been concerning for a number of years, but now it has become an issue that we have to deal with as a university. So this is our current E&G budgeted revenue by source. Dr. Shields has already touched on this a little bit. We get about 40% of our budgeted revenue from the state. We don't expect that to grow. If anything, we expect that it will decline. If we can keep it where it is, we'll be doing good. But that's about 40% of our budget. Another 57% comes from tuition and fees. And we'll come back to that in a minute. The other 3% is all the other things we do on campus, not auxiliaries, but everything else we do in the E&G sector. And I guess I should back up and define E&G. That's the general operations of the university. That is where all of us live and work. That's where our salaries come from. That's the expenses that we make. That is what we call the E&G budget. So the key takeaway here is the only revenue slice that we can expect to grow by any significant amount is tuition and fees. And there's two ways to do that. We can raise them, or we can bring in more students to pay them. And we're going to have to talk about both of those, I think, as we go forward. But that's important to understand, that tuition and fee revenue is, as they say, our bread and butter. So this is the current E&G budget expenditures by function. And we're going to show you expenses by a couple of different ways. This is by function. So we're all familiar with the terms instruction, academic support, student services, institutional support. This reflects how our budget breaks down with all of these areas. The key takeaway is the vast majority of this budget is on instruction, academic support, research, student services, and scholarships. And we think as an institution that is an appropriate way to spend our money. We think that's important. And we think when we compare ourselves to other institutions across the country that we're fairly well aligned with how we allocate our resources. So that is if you look at it in terms of function. The other way we look at it, we call this natural classifications, but really what it breaks it down is where we're spending our dollars in terms of supplies and services, salaries and fringe benefits, all of those different areas that you all are familiar with in your departmental budgets. The key takeaway here is, as with any type of service organization, the vast majority of our expenses are in salaries and fringe benefits. Our biggest expense is our people. And again, we're not unique in that. Most service organizations see a similar distribution. Most colleges and universities see a similar distribution, and we think that's appropriate. But the key takeaway from here is, as you all know, we've already made cuts in our supplies budgets over the last few years. And we've done that across the board. And I've heard from a lot of people on how difficult that is on our departments. That can't continue. We've reduced our supplies and services budgets, at least in my estimation, about as much as we can. And so when we look going forward as to how we're going to control our expenses, we have to keep in mind that we've already cut across the board in that area, and we're going to have to think differently going forward. Now, what that exactly means, that's the point of having this conversation.
I think it was last year, I told the Faculty Senate, I don't have the answers to these questions. You don't want the accountant making these decisions. It needs to be a campus conversation about how we look going forward. But my takeaway, and what I want you all to think about on this expense budget, it's not so much how we have it allocated. When you think of this as a pie, the pie is going to have to shrink. I think that's the reality. We hope to grow our revenue pie. We hope it gets bigger, but we're also going to have a serious discussion about reducing the size of this expense pie. So let's talk a little bit about what we call the structural budget deficit in E&G. A couple of years ago, that was just over $18 million. What does that mean? It means we were balancing our budget, the difference between our revenue and expense. We were short by about $18 million, and we were balancing that with one-time sources of money. At the time, we were all aware of that. We knew that. We were comfortable with that because the hope was we were going to make changes and turn that revenue situation around, and we would be able to replace these one-time sources of funds with ongoing increases in our revenue. And so we were comfortable making that decision. But we also recognized, as I said earlier, that can't continue over the long haul. If you're living off your savings, sooner or later that will catch up with you. And so while we were comfortable doing that, we also started to say, this can't continue. Last year, going from 22 into 23, we made some changes. We were able to reduce that structural deficit from 18 million to just under 13 million. What we're saying going forward is we have to come up with a plan to reduce that. We need to get off that and reduce it to zero over some period of time. What you see represented here is what it would look like if we attempted to reduce the structural deficit over the next 3 years. That would require, on an annual basis, a reduction of about $4.3 million. This is average. Those three gray lines or bars to the right of the screen represent projections going forward, and it's an average. We need to somehow hit that target of 4.3 million a year. Maybe we can do better some years. Maybe we can have to reduce it other years. But the point is we need to get rid of this structural deficit, and we need to come up with a plan collectively on how we're going to do that. And that can be through a combination, it should be through a combination of increased revenues and reduced expenses. But I think the takeaway that I draw from the charts that Dr. Shields was showing earlier is it's unrealistic to think we're going to grow ourselves out of this situation. The market is just such that even if we do everything right, there are fewer students to draw from and there is increased competition. So yes, growing is an important part of this, but that won't be the full solution. We're going to have to look at, I hesitate to use the term, but we accountants like it, we're going to have to talk about right sizing. As Dr. Shields mentioned, we're a campus, not just in terms of staff, but in terms of infrastructure, in terms of buildings, that was built to hold 12,000 students, and we're not there today. And we're going to have to recognize that reality. So the last slide I'm going to talk about is budget patches. Patches is not really an accounting term, but that'll work, I guess, for what we're talking about here. So we've been fortunate the last few years that we had some, as I mentioned, we had some one-time funds that we could draw on to apply to this situation. We were fortunate, as was all of higher education, to see a significant inflow of dollars from the HERF program in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In round numbers, we received about $31 million in institutional funds as a result of that program. We also received another $23 million that was earmarked for students. That money came in and we turned around and gave it back out to students. The $31 million that we received, we did three things with that. The first thing we had to do was reimburse students for room and board, students that we sent home early. We spent about $3 million of the $31 million refunding money to students. We spent about another $7 million in purchasing supplies related to the pandemic, face masks, hand sanitizers, all that stuff that we dealt with during that time. The vast majority of that money, $21 million, went to replace revenue that we lost during the pandemic, revenue that we lost in our housing, in our residence halls, on our meal plans, in our and in our E&G operations. So we were fortunate to have that money. That money is now gone. We cannot continue to rely on that. Dr. Shields already mentioned the revenue that we've gotten from online. We've also been fortunate to get revenue, see an increase in our revenue from international students. That's great when we have those international students. We're all aware of the political situation that we operate in, and so we've been reluctant to permanently commit revenue from online or from international students because of the uncertainty that surrounds that. But that has been a help to us in these recent times. And the last thing I would speak about is our reserve funds. We are fortunate to have a significant amount in reserve. And I say we're fortunate because we have a lot of demands against those reserves. It's important that we maintain our bond rating, and that's something that when they come in and evaluate our bonds and our financial situation, they look at what our reserves are. That's important because that affects our ability to issue debt. And so we maintain a high level of reserves because of our bond rating. We are also required, I think it was mentioned earlier, HLC looks at that in terms of how much do you have available to operate. And we have right now about 200 days, maybe a little bit more than that, of operating capital. It cost us about $500,000 per day to operate the university. $500,000 per day. So think about that. If the state were to, for whatever reason, be unable to make our appropriations available to us, or if we have a situation similar to the pandemic or where we live, possibly a tornado or whatever, where tuition and fee dollars weren't available to us, we would have to live off of our reserves. And one of the things that they ask us to track is, how long can you do that? The legislature looks at that, HLC looks at that, our bond ratings all look at that. So it's important to maintain a high level of reserves because of that. The other thing I would mention here is deferred maintenance. We currently have approximately $146 million worth of deferred maintenance on our campus. And as Dr. Fry can tell you, something breaks every day. And so we have to have the ability to be able to plug a leak in the roof or fix a bathroom when it goes out or whatever the situation is. So it's important to maintain reserves for that. And then the last thing here is we want to keep reserves so that we can take advantage of strategic opportunities. Currently what we're looking at is the gift that we received last year for the Wingate Hall. That was about a $20 million gift that we're required to match. And so we're continuing to look at fundraising options for that. But the other two options to us are we're either going to draw down our reserves or we're going to issue debt to be able to do that. And we always have these opportunities in front of us. Several years ago, we had NYIT, and we drew from our reserves to be able to retrofit Wilson Hall to make it available for that. And so it's important for all those reasons that we maintain reserves. They can help us temporarily, but going back to my original point, you can't live off your savings. You have to set your operations up so that they're self-funding, and that's what we're talking about here today. Dr. Shields, I think that is the end of my remarks.
All right, go ahead. I forget what the next slide is. Okay, so some of the opportunities that we have ahead. You know, I want to end on something like, I know that the accountants want to talk about, well, this is where we've got to move expenditures around. I want to reiterate, Russ is not saying at any point that we're going to issue something to the deans and say, cut 10% of your people. That's not what we're talking about at all. What we are talking about, though, is that we have to take a tough look at, we have some majors that have 10 people, some programs that have 10 majors in them. If somebody leaves or somebody retires, do we give that line back to that group, or do we give it to a group that has, they're turning students away, right? That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about letting people go. And I'm not saying that like, if a dean has somebody that's on performance improvement plan and they have to let somebody go, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that from our office, we're not saying we're letting anybody go. We're not in any place like that. All we're saying is right now we're going to have to start making some tough decisions about where do we have lines, and if something becomes vacant, what do we do with that line? Does that make sense? The other thing that's an opportunity is that, you know, around 2015, when other institutions started seeing that the face-to-face class sizes drop, a lot of other institutions made major changes to their admission standards. They actually made these big, huge back doors that pretty much anybody for very small reasons can be a part of. I was a part of some of those admission standard procedures, and that's one of the reasons that you do see growth in some of these areas, because they are letting students in. I do not think that they're letting students in who can't succeed. I have had some people ask me, you know, are you just letting people in that's just unethical because they're going to fail? The institutions that are letting these folks in have graduation rates that are nearly 70%. Our graduation rate is still at 53%. The students that are letting in at Ole Miss or at Tennessee or Missouri, they're graduating at 70% or close to it, or above in some cases. We have a situation where we're really looking at what's happening to our juniors, what's happening to our seniors, because we have to start thinking about graduation rates, because it's just morally, it keeps me up at night to go, I've got a junior, they're so close. If they just hang on a little bit longer, they have a degree. But if they leave in January of their junior year, they don't have a degree and they have debt, right? And then the funding formula from the state looks at graduation rates. That's what we have to start looking at. We have to start looking at graduation rates. Now, the first year, the second year, I get where that came from. A lot of studies came out in the 2000s, 2000 to 2015-ish. Everybody was saying, look, if you get them over that hump, that first year, then they've got sunk costs. They're like, I just got 2 years left, I'm gonna do it, right? But somehow we have the different issue. We've got some students that are facing some things that we don't necessarily know all about it, but we're gonna figure that out. It's a huge opportunity, right? So we do have opportunities to get new students that are coming in that we're not recruiting right now. We do have opportunities to keep the students we do have here. And that's not gonna look like it's always looked, because the students that are coming in, I wanna jump back to what I said earlier, if a student has a 3.6, but they go to Martha and they're anxious, they can't leave their room, they're depressed, they don't know what they're doing with their life, social media is driving them crazy and they're addicted to it, which it is addictive, they can't get off of it. Those are the types of things that we're gonna have to deal with now, because it's a very different type of retention world that we live in right now. And our students might be very different than what might work someplace at California, or might work in Georgia, or might work in New York. We're gonna have to figure out what works here. Does that make sense? So our current student-faculty ratio, is this one up here yet? So when I was at the legislative audit hearing down in Little Rock, every bit of information that, you know, the accountants and the system office and accountants here were giving me, I was doing my best to memorize everything. The one bit of information that I was like, please don't let them ask me this. So just a few years ago, our teacher to faculty, student to faculty ratio was 18-1. That's low, but it's defensible, right? 18-1, you say, hey, you come here, you're gonna be taught by a professor, you know, you've got a low class sizes you got going on, this is great. It's now this semester down to 13-1. So 1 student, 13 faculty. That the legislature is gonna look at and go, you all have way too many faculty. Now, I don't believe that, and I know you don't believe that, but convincing them that's gonna be something different, right? I'm not saying we're letting any faculty go. I'm saying that we need to make sure that we're putting them in the right places so that where they are put, they're growing. We got students that are coming in those areas that are growing. Does that make sense? Okay, I got some nods, so that's great. Let's see, so next, I'm just gonna say we're gonna have to continue to innovate. We're gonna have to do things that we haven't done before. You know, I taught American National Government, I taught Intro to Statistics, I taught biostatistics for the science folks. Every now and then I'd teach a calculus class when the math department got in trouble. That's definitely going to still be our bread and butter. But we're also going to have to be thinking about how do we make sure these students feel like they belong? Do they belong here? Do they find the niche of friends that they fit with and they click with? Do they want to be here? Do they tell their friends they want to be here? When they leave here, do they succeed in their jobs? And are we following up with them and then saying, hey, now that you've been in your career for 2 years, is there anything else you need? Did your company change software? You need a training program in that? Can we put that together? You know, if you're in grad school, I see Sharice over here. If you're in grad school, is there something that you need that you didn't get here? Can we give it to you really fast over the summer? Can we do that for you? Can we prep you better? I mean, we've got to be thinking about how do we help these students succeed, because I'm going to go back to the very beginning again. We're not publicly funded anymore, right? We're privately funded by these students. It changes everything. And we can complain about it, and trust me, I can complain about it. I don't believe in it. I think higher education is a public good. I think a lot of other countries treat it like a public good. But the reality is the United States does not and has not for 20 years. So we have to adjust to it, or we're not going to be where we want to be through this valley, okay? So not all of the innovations that we know of right now are happening, but we'll have to make them. I just want to say that I feel that with this team, you all were so innovative way before everybody else in Arkansas was. This team took off, did amazing things that the rest of the state didn't. I think that with this team, we'll innovate again. I have more faith that we'll grow than maybe some of the accountants do. But I feel like that yin and yang is a good balance. I feel like that, you know, if my house is in debt, I can make more money. And I feel like that's what I'm focused on. I'm focused on how do I help you? How do we help the campus? How do we make more money so that we're okay? So that we're not in these places these other places are. So the last slide that I'll go on here is I'll just say that I really feel like communication and teamwork here are the key. I'm not going to go through each one of these bullet points. And I think we may even have time for questions, which is great, if it's okay with Bill. Am I reading my watch right? But I feel like, you know, there have been silos of communication. I was surprised, and you all call it, you don't all call it the executive committee. What do y'all call it? I forget. What is it, Erica? The cabinet. So I think it was my second meeting in the cabinet. I'm like, wait a minute, don't do this. I want to know what you're doing, and I want Eric, I want you know what Martha's doing. Martha, I want you to know what Lonnie's doing. And Lonnie, I want you to know what Russ and Lynn are doing. I want everybody to know what we're all doing. And then we're meeting with deans to say, deans, what are you doing and how can we help you? And then I'm going to departments. I want departments to hear, what are you facing? What are you struggling with? What are you dealing with? I've been to several different departments. I don't know if Justin's here. Anybody here from sociology, criminology? I see do I see one hand or no? Nope, they're not here. They're all teaching because they have gone through quite a bit of ups and downs. And meeting with them, I learned a lot. And I've learned that there hasn't been the communication with them that they wanted to have, and we want to make sure that that happens across the board. Because I really feel that if we're all pulling in the same direction, we're going to crush the rest of the state. We're going to crush a lot of the other places around here. But we do need to get on the same page with this. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody's going to go, yes, kumbaya, this is going to be great, I'm all in. We're not going to have everybody do that. But for as many people as we can to say, let's do everything we can to make Arkansas State as great as we can and to make it through this valley as easily and as painlessly as possible, those are the people that I really want to work with. Those are the people that I really want you to join this team. I'm not a person that I believe strongly that we can all get a lot done if we don't care who gets the credit. If we keep in mind the students, the research, the community involvement, that's what's important, right? That's the noble calling that we're all doing, right? I won't name the industry, but I just recently toured an industry where I went in and it was really loud. It's like this, there was no building, there was no lights, no sunshine. Even these lights were kind of gone. I could barely see people. I could barely hear anybody. The few offices that they did have were cubicles that were, like up to here on me, and I'm not very tall, so it was just up to here. And I was like, oh my God, get me out of here. I felt like I was kind of in a prison or something, but I was like, I got to get out of here. I want our students to be able to decide, I want to do that, or I want to go beyond that. I want our students to be as successful as they can be. What really motivates me is taking our students that I know that they're great, although some of them don't realize how great they are, and us showing them how great they are. I'm really motivated by taking first-gen students, underrepresented students, and showing them, hey, you can do anything any of these other people can do. I don't care how intimidating they appear. In fact, you're probably better. You just don't know it. I'm all about, let's do research that challenges the big people. Let's do research that blows them out of the water. They come talking to us, right? And I feel like we can do that if we're working together. Now, do we have some people that may not want to do that? Fine. But as many people that want to, I feel like we're going to get through this valley stronger than we will. I hate to sound like this sounds, my mom would tell me that this sounds trite, but you know, you do get stronger, you do get better when times are tough. You do get lazier when times are easy. We're about to go through some tough times, and I'm choosing to say, we're going to get better through it. We're going to get through this, and at the end of this, we're going to say, look at us, look at you, look how great you did. But as many people as we can getting on the same team, we want that. So let me just take a few minutes if it's okay. Any questions? We'll take them. But like I say, we're going to give this PowerPoint to everybody. So if you have other questions you want to send privately, email them, and we'll continue this conversation. This is just the first. We haven't talked about enrollment strategies, but we have enrollment strategies. We haven't talked about retention strategies, but we have retention strategies. We haven't talked about reallocations, but we have those strategies. The next conversations will be all about those. Anything else you want added to the conversations, we'll have them. So any questions here? I'm so depressed, I'm going to slit my wrist. I don't even see Carlita smiling. It's bad. This is really bad. Did you have a question, or are you just mad that I picked on you, called you out? Okay. You forgive me? Okay, thank you. Question? I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it. Oh, yes, over here. Sorry, I didn't see you.
Brad Rollins from the School Media Journal.
Hi, Brad. How are you?
I just want to thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Didn't expect that, but thank you. Well, this is what I feel. I feel like the transparency, so you know what we're doing, the transparency, like the people that I've worked with before will always tell you they didn't always agree with me, but they always knew what I decided and why. And then I would always allow them to tell me, I don't agree with this. And then we would discuss it and we'd talk about it. But they always knew what we were trying to do. So I just believe in it. So thank you. Others? Okay, if not, I'll stay up here and I will answer any questions you have. I think I'm meeting with the chairs real soon, and then I'm going to Faculty Senate later to just continue these conversations. And then we're going to continue the next conversation later. I'm not sure which topic we have up next, but we will continue these, okay? I just want to say thank you for everything that you've done. We're in the top 3 up there because of what you all have done. And I'm so glad to be there as opposed to the bottom 3. Because down there I'd go, I'm not sure what to do. I'd be going to you going, what do we do? But thank you for what you've done. You've been amazing people. I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad to be here. Thank you very much.